Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are in the world. Welcome to another edition of Say Goodbye to Crazy. It's been a long time, but hopefully we'll be back with a little consistency now. I'm Paul Elam, co-author of Say Goodbye to Crazy, and I am with the other co-author of Say Goodbye to Crazy, that is Dr. Tara Palmatier. Say hi, Dr. T.
Hello, everyone. Hope your summer's off to a good start, or winter if you're on the other hemisphere.
Well, and I certainly hope it's not as hot as it is here in Houston.
I think that would be difficult. You'd have to go to hell for it to be hotter than it is in Houston right now, probably.
Yes, actually, we go to hell for vacations from here. But anyway, we decided, it was probably a good idea that maybe rather than scrambling for topics every week, we have, I don't remember how many, 30 some odd chapters in the book. I thought, that'll be great material for shows. So what we'll do is we'll just take people from the beginning of the book through each chapter one at a time. We'll provide a permanent record for that. If you can't afford to buy the book, you'll get a lot of the information free. If you can afford to buy the book and want it, though, it is, however, in the low bar right now. All you got to do is click on it. And I would suggest also reading the reviews before making your decision because they are quite good. We've been really pleased with the reception that the book's gotten. Okay, so today we're going to introduce crazy a little bit, and we're going to talk about divorce bitterness, which is sort of where all this starts. And in order to do that, we need to talk a little bit about the grieving process, because that's what happens. I'm going to point out a couple of things and then let Dr. T take it away for even more detail. But back in the 70s, I believe it was 77, Elizabeth Kubler-Ross wrote a book called On Death and Dying, and it was based on her interviews with terminal patients, many of them. And she picked up a pattern, a process that people went through when they were preparing to die, when they were having to grieve the loss of their lives. And she put it in 5 very distinct categories. It begins with shock and denial when you get a diagnosis of terminal cancer. No, this can't be true. You're shocked. You're dismayed. The second stage is anger. That comes through. You get mad at God, you get mad at yourself because you smoked 20 years ago or whatever. You're angry at the medical establishment. You may be angry about a ton of things, but you're really angry about the fact that you're dying. The third stage from Kubler-Ross is bargaining. And this is what people, and by the way, on these stages, you can vacillate. You can go forward, backward. You can be kind of on the borderline, and you can be sort of acting out all of them at the same time. But at any rate, not to digress, bargaining is where people often turn to religion or to say that, I'm going to go on this super diet and maybe if I pray hard enough, maybe if I be the best person I can be, that whatever deity is out there will look at me with favor and help me out. It is a natural part of accepting the passing of your life to struggle, to bargain, to find a way out of it. The next stage number 4, is grief, is actually the grieving, or I think she referred to it as preparatory grieving in one way, or preparatory something, I forget. But the grief process is basically, that stage is the pain of the loss. It is the really difficult part where you figure out it's not going away, that this is really going to happen, and the sorrows in your life come up, the regrets in your life come up, the things that won't happen for you come up, the dreams that you won't realize. All of those things come together into a very, very, very powerful emotional experience. And then finally, and in most cases, this is not too terribly long before people actually pass, they reach the 5th and final stage of grief, which is acceptance. And they are actually, in many cases, at peace with the fact that it's their time to go. and they become ready to go. Now, we want to point out that when we're talking about this, that the work was based on a book that was written about end of life circumstances. That's what Kubler-Ross was writing about. But since then, I think a lot of practitioners have figured out that there's a similar process that goes on, and it's become actually, I think, more widely discussed and used in talking about losses like divorces. And I mean, it can be your house got burglarized and you can feel yourself go through the same stages of process. No, this didn't happen. Oh, I want to catch the SOB that did it. Well, maybe if I call the police, I'll get my stuff back right away, bargaining, right? And then the sadness, and then finally acceptance of what's happened. This happens with divorce too. And what normal people do is go through these stages and they end up accepting and moving on with their life. And actually a divorce becomes something healing for them. And in the end, it is something about a new chapter in their lives, and they move on. Now, that's what normal people do. I think Dr. T, and at this point, I'm going to pass the baton to her. Crazy doesn't do grief normal. That's why there's still conflict 15 years after the divorce is over. She doesn't grieve. And Dr. T, why don't you explain to everybody a little bit about that, about what happens with Crazy's grief process?
Sure. Crazy is, if she's normal, she's Abby normal, to borrow from Young Frankenstein. No, crazy, in my experience, does not have the psychological capacity to grieve a loss. And there are reasons, psychological reasons for this. But first, let's discuss the process that Crazy will typically go through upon hearing that her husband has filed for divorce, or even if she initiates the divorce, she will still go through this process. So as we discuss in our book, the grief process for Crazy will typically start out like anybody else, with disbelief, shock, denial. I can't believe this is over. I can't believe you're ending our marriage, et cetera, et cetera. And then maybe have some bargaining. What if we go to marriage counseling? Or she'll, do a Hoover, in which she tries going back to the love bombing or honeymoon stage of the relationship, and she acts nice and kind and loving again for a short time. That doesn't last, so don't be fooled. And then instead of going through the remaining three stages, she gets stuck in anger and pretty much stays there. Anger, anger, anger. Now, it's my opinion that the reason Crazy gets stuck is because emotionally she is somewhere stuck between toddlerhood and adolescence. And children have not psychologically developed enough to actually go through a grieving process. I did my dissertation on childhood grief. They go through grief, but it's a much different process. Crazy, as many of you know, also doesn't like feeling discomfort or pain, particularly if she's feeling discomfort or pain as a result of something she has done, and will instead become angry and blame who is ever closest for her feeling pain, discomfort, guilt, shame, whatever it is she doesn't want to feel. And that's what happens when she goes through the grieving process at the end of a relationship. She can't go through the introspection that is required, that a healthy person will go through in that process, where their lives, they look at what they've done, examining their behaviors. Okay, how did I contribute to the problem? How did I get into that in the first place? Is there work I need to do on myself? No, Crazy is not capable of that. She won't do it, or he, because men are like, they're male crazies too, obviously. And just gets angry and it's all your fault. And it's not enough for her to be, it's not enough oftentimes for her, for Crazy, to just be angry with you. She will then enlist her flying monkeys, her minions, her stooges, her accomplices, her enablers, negative advocates in the form of attorneys, pastors, rabbis, counselors, you name it. And everybody must be angry at you. I mean, if it were her just being angry at you, it wouldn't be so bad. You were married to her, you know what that's like. And now that you don't have to live under the same roof with her, it doesn't have to be a big deal. But she will try to turn everyone else against you, even your children, if you share them, which is why it is a problem. And it could also result in, out of anger, Crazy will make false allegations of domestic violence or child abuse to punish you because she's having to feel the pain of loss. So did I cover that?
Well, I think so. I think maybe another way of looking at it is to say that maybe she's making the false accusations in order to avoid the pain of loss. That there is so much pain, particularly with personality disordered people, with abandonment, feelings of abandonment. That is a tremendously much more painful experience for them in many ways than it is for the average person. That's not to rob anybody of their pain, of their grief. Everybody goes through it, whether you're the one that files the divorce or not. You're going to have a grieving process because there's a loss there, whether you initiated it or not. But what I think is another thing that I think is real important to point out here, it is what we're saying here, and I think it's quite accurate, is that all the chaos, the turmoil, the acting out, the lying, the false accusations, the sabotaging of custody, the sabotaging of visitation, all the stuff that happens, the repeated attempts to go back to court, is somebody who is stuck in the early stage of grief and can't move past it. And that's really interesting, but I don't want to try to send the message that it's your job to help them grieve. Depending on their level of insight, depending on what they're capable of, if they need help with grief work, they need to go to a therapist and get help with grief work. Sometimes, a lot of those cases, they're not going to get that help because, like Dr. T said, they're not capable of the process. There's not enough maturity, there's not enough emotional development, not enough insight. Not enough of unfortunately, all the tools it takes for people to deal with life without being crazy aren't present in these people most of the time. This is not, we're not saying, oh, here's the magic thing. If you can just get her to move through her anger and her bargaining and into her grieving, and she'll finally get to acceptance and she'll quit bothering you and or your family. No, she won't. And no, you can't do it. I can't do it. Dr. T can't do it for them. I think something I wrote in the description was they won't grieve even if Sigmund Freud grabbed them by the hair and tried to drag them through the process. It just won't happen. So you have to accept that. And of course, that's what the book is all about, is the biggest obstacle for most people in saying goodbye to crazy is to accept that they're really dealing with crazy, and to figure out that they don't have any say-so in what goes on in crazy's head or heart or what goes on in their behavior. That can only limit contact and separate and detach. Did I miss anything there, Dr. T?
I don't think so, but one of the things I want to add too is that a lot of times, at least the men I work with who are currently in the divorce process, some of these guys are going on years number 2 or 3, which there is absolutely no reason a divorce should take that long. But oftentimes when divorcing crazy, it does. And I believe part of that is, it goes beyond that they're often entitled and believe that they should have every last stick of furniture and every last asset and cent in the bank account. But by prolonging the divorce and forcing interaction, it's a way to stave off their feelings of abandonment which is what they're feeling during the grief process of divorce. So they drag that out. And it's also, I think, it's not the sole reason, but it's also why they want to keep the conflict going after divorce. And if you couple that with the fact that oftentimes crazy enjoys the buzz from being angry, of feeling wronged, of getting to tell a victim story. So when you combine all of those factors together, it makes sense why they rarely leave that stage of permanent anger at the loss. You know, crazy's the bitter old lady in the retirement home who's still perseverating on the fact that her neighbor, Mr. McGregor, ran over her rose bush in 1957. You know, they don't let this stuff go.
That was a very good year, by the way.
The year you were born?
Yes.
I didn't do that. There you go.
Chevrolets and MRAs. Oh, God. Yeah, I mean, I think that's something important to really think about too, because, you know, again, one of the biggest problems that there is in trying to help people separate themselves from crazy's activity and to get them to quit trying to fix it and everything is that they live in denial about how deep a psychological problem that crazy is. We're not saying crazy as something that's hyperbolic. This is really, really crazy. We're talking about people that are so out of touch with any sense of morality, decency, fairness, or anything, that they will destroy their own children in order to not feel abandoned. Think about that. They will destroy their own children, ruin their future, ruin their lives, rip them to shreds with their fathers. They will destroy the father. They will destroy the father's new family. They will destroy their own family and anybody else that gets in the way, just so they don't have to feel something.
That's right. There's one man on my forum who's been embroiled in, has to be one of the worst cases of parental alienation I've witnessed over the years. He's also a client, where his ex-crazy has their teenage son engaging in criminal behaviors. She's got the kid calling my client's employer in the middle of the night saying, "My father abandoned me, we can't pay for our cell phone. He's living with the whore who broke up my mom's marriage," bullying his now girlfriend's children on Facebook because he didn't want to go on visitation. He came out of the house swinging an axe, and crazy is encouraging the child to do this. And the court's response was pretty much nothing, which is frightening to say the least, but I don't think that's uncommon. And so, yeah, crazy will go to the extreme of possibly encouraging the children to engage in criminal activity to punish the spouse who, or the partner who has ended the relationship. It's really sick. And I do believe that they derive some degree of pleasure for this. Otherwise, they wouldn't be doing it.
Absolutely. Oh, I have seen it before, Dr. T. Unfortunately, anybody that does any sort of counseling at some point or another has to take on borderline clients, and especially in the early days when you don't have much of a choice about what's thrown at you, you end up with borderlines. And my experience with them was that the sense of regret, guilt, anything like that, when I asked them to define how they felt about some of their actions, it was always justified, and there was always this, sometimes subtle, sometimes overt, but this little glint of glee But in talking about using their children like pawns and turning them against their father, they were there. You could tell that there was joy in their minds about that on some level. Now, not taken away from the pain that they're in. I know they're in a lot of pain, but you know that.
You know what? You know what? To hell with their pain. Seriously, to hell with their pain. You know what? A lot of us carry around a lot of pain. We're hurt because people treat us poorly, or things don't go the way we want in a relationship, or we're disappointed, or we have tragic, horrible things happen to us. But you know what? We don't take it out on other people. We don't teach our children to hate their other parent. We don't file false police reports or any of the other shite that crazy does. So fine, they're hurting. That might explain their behavior, but it doesn't excuse it. So I really, you know what, if they're hurting, get help. Don't abuse and harm others. So
I'm not suggesting in any way that you should take pity on crazy at all. I
wanted to make that really, really clear.
And I was also, I agree, your job about crazy's pain is to do the best possible job of not giving a damn about it.
It's because that is one way that crazy will manipulate you, even as she's tormenting you and making your life a living hell. I've seen it. The victims of crazy will be like, oh, but she had such a tough childhood. Oh, she, you know, she's hurting. She struggles with addiction. It's like, well, all of those things may be true, but that doesn't mean you have to sacrifice yourself and your well-being to her issues, because you know what? That's not going to change anything. She's still going to have issues. She's not going to relent. She's just going to say, thank you for making it easier for me to stick the shiv in your ribs. That's all.
Yeah, and as somebody who worked with people who had substance abuse issues for 20 years, I can tell you the same answer applied to every case: quit using. I mean, well, again, it's a behavioral condition to getting better. If you want to get better from an addiction, you have to like quit sticking needles in your arms and quit snorting coke and smoking crack and drinking or whatever it else is that floats your boat. And again, just like with crazy, nobody else can do that for you. You have to take responsibility for it yourself. There was another point, I'm hoping it hasn't slipped my aging mind, that I wanted to bring up about this. Oh yes, because we talked in the book at some length about normal divorce bitterness. And so one of the things that I think is important to note is that there is crazy behavior frequently out of both people, whether they're personality disordered or not, during the process of a divorce. This is where dreams have been shattered. This is where grief is starting to set in. That process, the anger that comes with it that we described earlier is there. Every hope you had for the future, the feelings of abandonment that, by the way, for the borderline listeners out there, you're not the only people that feel abandoned, okay? It happens to everybody.
Feelings of betrayal, humiliation, if there was infidelity.
Exactly. All those things play into it. Can, you know, the limbic system gets real active during a divorce. It's just happens. It's nothing to be, you know, to feel wrong about, but it is important to note that some of that behavior during divorce is normal, but that doesn't mean that you're helpless to tell the difference, because you can still go back and look at your marriage. How was she behaving then?
At some point, for somebody who isn't disordered or crazy, a mechanism clicks on and says, wait a minute, I don't want to race to the bottom here. Time to back away from this and get some perspective and just get on with the business of wrapping things up. That rarely happened with crazy, unless you have a rare one who whose greed exceeds her need for retaliation and revenge, and she realizes if she goes into nuclear winter, that means the attorneys will get all of the assets instead of her.
Oh, yes. And, you know, don't let yourself be fooled. If you've been divorced for 6 years and she still sees your girlfriend as the whore that broke up your marriage, that's
Still
not normal.
It's still fresh.
Yes, that is not normal grief, folks. It's not normal grief. I mean, there's not a...
Yet she sees your new girlfriend, who you didn't even know at the time of divorce, as the cause of the divorce. Oh yes, that happens too.
Yes, it does. Even if she's the one that filed for the divorce and wanted the divorce, it's your fault for leaving her. If she's mad at you for leaving her when you were the one that were served with papers, there's an indication right there that maybe you're not quite dealing with normal. There's a lot of ways to tell.
Crazy has a standard answer for that one when you say, but you're the one who filed. But you didn't fight for us.
Yes, and as we all know,
fight for our relationship, when in reality, if the guy were to do that, he would essentially be fighting crazy, which, as we stress in our book time and time again, not worth it.
Folks, don't you understand? If you want to hang on to crazy, you have to stalk her. It's the only way to do it, because she wants to get rid of you. She wants somebody that will suffer endlessly to try to be with her. And this whole game of filing for divorce and then saying, well, you didn't fight for me, is just more part of the abuse that she's inflicting. It's not worth it. It's not worth it. And that's, again, and we should do this, I think, with every time we have one of these talks. The onus, again, if you accept the premise that you can't argue with a sick mind, which you should accept that premise. You can no more argue with crazy about who was at fault in the divorce or who really caused things than you can argue with a deeply paranoid schizophrenic about what's real and what's not real. You can't have that. Well, actually, you'll probably have better luck with the schizophrenic than you would with crazy on getting closer to reality. And there's medications that can help schizophrenics, not great medications, but they have them. But the onus has to go back onto the individual, that if you want to get through your grief process, bargaining about whether or not you can help crazy get better or whether or not you should be taking care of crazy and all these other things, those are your obstacles. Those are the obstacles to your going through your grief process. They're the ones that you put in your own path. If you have all the evidence in the world that you're dealing with crazy and you know that crazy doesn't get better, they just get meaner, and every kindness you show is going to be exploited. Every bit of effort you put into making things better or easier. One of the worst ones I see, particularly with men, was maybe if I'm generous and give her the house, she'll treat me nice. No, she won't.
For it. If you're going to give her something, you need to make her think she wrested it away from you.
Yep.
Because it's only winning for crazy if she thinks she's hurting you by taking something or destroying something that you value. And that includes
expand on it a little bit, because that's a really, really important point when it comes to dealing with crazy.
One of the things I tell the guys I work with who are going through a divorce with crazy, and this would apply for women divorcing a man crazy, is know what your bottom line is, know what the most important things are to you, but don't tell crazy. Have decoys. Pretend like those things are really, really important to you and make her fight for it, and then give in and say, okay, fine, you can have X, Y, and Z, but I want B and D.
With putting up some resistance to X, Y, and Z before you give in, before you place your demands for the other thing. Now, I can already almost sense that at some point in the next few weeks, I'm going to look back at the comments of this video and I'm going to see, ooh, man, these are terrible people. They're talking about twisting and manipulating people. You're goddamn right. If you want to survive a breakup with a real crazy, you better get smart about how you do it. And what Dr. T just said is vastly important. If whatever you really want, you are much better off acting like you want other things a lot more, and even show some effort to get them right over them.
The briar patch, anything but the briar patch.
Yes, exactly. And then settle for the leftovers that you really wanted to begin with.
Right.
Because she'll feel like she won if she took something from you that you wanted. Why? Because her objective is to inflict pain. She doesn't care about this stuff so much as she cares about winning. It's all about winning. It's all about prevailing. It's that way with narcissists too. It's that way with borderlines. A lot of forms of crazy. They want to win.
Sheen.
I'm sorry?
And Charlie Sheen.
Yeah, and Charlie Sheen too.
You'll find crazy hanging out with old Chuckles, knocking back some tiger's blood.
I don't care what anybody says. I'd still be Charlie Sheen if I had a chance. I would actually not.
The crazy doesn't stop, and I think that would be it. Well, you know what? Nah, never mind. I think not going to go there. Could be twisted again. You know, I think too, one of the most difficult thing a lot of non-disordered folks have when dealing with a disordered person is truly accepting and understanding what it means that she is disordered. Well, but if I present it this way and I can explain things just like this, well, you know, why would she still do that? And the answer isn't, it's very simple. It's because crazy people do crazy things. Cruel, malicious people do cruel, malicious things. There's really no other answer. And yes, sometimes she will do things out of spite that harm her as well. I mean, that to me is one of the, I mean, right up there with doing the same thing over and over again and expecting a different outcome is another definition of crazy. And that is what you were dealing with. And I work with a lot of engineers, which it's like, God, there's something about like the super logical guys who get together with the emotional, high octane emotional reasoner women. And it's just, it's so hard for them.
I remember somebody I worked with that was a NASA engineer, helped like space missions, had a borderline wife, and he kept trying to make sense out of everything. I got to the point where I wanted to jump across the office at him and grab him by the collar and shake him and say, what part of this are you not getting? You're not going to make sense of it ever. This is not as simple as landing something on the moon. It's a lot more complicated, and you can't do it.
No, well, and I too have I literally have worked with rocket scientists, and it's like this is not an equation. There is no, you cannot apply reason and logic to this, because if you do, reason and logic just make her angrier. It's not going to help you, and that is something that you've got to accept. That she's just going to do crazy things because she's crazy, and there's no persuading her otherwise. There's no getting her to see reason. So expect it and plan for it. And that grief process, even if she remarries, that wound is still going to be fresh.
And she will be up her new husband with it, I promise you. But she has plenty of crazy to go around. He'll be catching hell, and she'll have more targets when she remarries. That doesn't mean all the attention's going to go away from you onto this other guy. It just means she has two people to beat up on at once. Don't ever think you're going to get relief from that. Dr. T, you know, I was thinking while you were talking about this issue of people trying to figure out a rational way to understand and saying, well, A and plus B equals C, or 1 and 1 is 2. So if I do this, if I concede this, then she'll concede something else. And they tend to treat crazy like she's not crazy, expecting her to respond to those things. And there's two things about that. One of it is that a lot of people, particularly men, I think, who lean more toward more logic than emotion, want to figure things out in their heads in a rational way and say blah blah blah. And unless, of course, he's a crazy guy, then he'll do the same thing that she does. But there's another part of this avoidance of accepting crazy's state of mind and what she's really like, that I see particularly in guys that have codependency issues, is that the attempt to perseverate on trying to find a rational answer or a rational way out or a way to get her behaved is really them avoiding their own grief. That they are trying not to grieve, because if they accept the way she really is, then it's going to be bring on the pain. Guys that are codependent that way, they have hearts, they bleed just like anybody else, and they hurt just like anybody else when marriages break up. And so a lot of times, you know, if you're one of these guys that's out there that keeps just, if you find yourself repetitively trying to figure out a rational way to deal with somebody that's demonstrated to you for 2 decades that they can't be dealt with rationally, then probably one or two things has happened. And one, you're not accepting it because you're just trying to apply logic, and that's the way you do things in life, and logic is supposed to work. Or you may be the one with the problem, real problem, with separating from that relationship. So you keep trying to make sense out of things, looking for a cure. But the answer is the same in both cases. If you've got a bona fide crazy, you're never going to get the results you're looking for. And that's unfortunate, but it's true.
Well, they're going to keep replaying the same dynamic. And I want to add a couple of things to that. If the guy is codependent and it's a repetitive cycle, there is definitely grief work that needs to be done. But I think more so than the relationship, the present relationship with crazy, but it's probably grief work that goes all the way back to childhood, because they didn't grieve the loss of having a crazy parent or parents, of being told not good enough, and, you know, being groomed to essentially get involved with this type of person as an adult. So there is grief work, but you got to go back, I think, even further than the relationship with crazy. And, you know, and we talk about this in one of our other podcasts, I can't remember which one, but it's that analysis by paralysis. And this is what a lot of the codependent guys I work with will do, is they become self-taught experts on personality disorders, but they're still stuck. And as I think we also discuss it in the book, analysis by paralysis is just a way of avoiding to do what you need to do, because you're hoping that you're going to find some answer that says, yes, it's okay to stay with this crazy abusive person, and there's hope, when there isn't.
And if that's the case, I would urge people who find themselves in that situation to maybe reconsider how logical you actually are, because that is actually a kind of magical thinking. That if I can stall, if I can delay, if I can analyze this, then somehow, you know, my winning lotto ticket is going to fall out of the sky into my hands, when it's not going to happen. And I'm telling you, I'm sure Dr. T's seen it. I know I've seen it. I've seen men in particular stuck in that for years and years and years and years. I mean, decades in some cases, where they are still trying to make sense of a marriage that died 15 years ago. And they have not. Then, of course, you're looking probably at family of origin issues. I would say almost every time that's what you're looking at in those cases. And you got to get those people, you got to find where that original trauma came from and start finding ways to work through it again, so you don't carry this baggage into yet another relationship. And that's the danger, is that if you don't, whatever it is that makes you avoid or makes you unable to handle the loss of somebody that's abusive and destroying your life, that's going to carry with you wherever you go. You'll go pick somebody else just like it. You won't even know you're doing it, but you will. It'll happen over and over again.
Or you'll meet a really stable, lovely, kind woman, or man who's actually capable of mutual reciprocal adult relationships, but she'll seem boring. And that spark, that crazy chemistry, emphasis on the crazy, you won't feel it. And basically what that means is that you're not accustomed to being treated well. You're not accustomed.
Will, you'll find her boring. And the other thing is, if you're still stuck in the mode of white knight and needing a maiden to rescue and needing somebody with big time issues and problems that you can be the savior for, then she's going to find you pretty boring really quickly, because healthy women don't need saviors. They don't need to start a relationship with, let me tell you about my terrible childhood and let's figure out how you're going to be the answer to all this, which is how crazy often starts relationships, or telling you about her last marriage and how the experience with you is going to be corrective because this last guy was the jerk. The answers to this stuff isn't about getting real, but unfortunately getting people to get real is a real challenge.
The other two guys who seem to get stuck in that type of repetitive loop are the overachievers, the I never fail at anything guys. I just have to keep working harder. I'm gonna be the last one standing on that field because I'm always the last one standing on that field, which I think is kind of crazy, because you can't fail at something that never had a chance at succeeding. And what you're essentially insisting on is that you're going to change a rattlesnake into a fluffy golden retriever puppy. And unless you have figured out the secret of alchemy, that's not going to happen. You're not going to turn a brick into gold. You're just not. And the other type of guy who gets stuck in this are the ones who are indeed narcissists or are heavily narcissistically traded because they can't handle the narcissistic injury of, I bought her everything. I took her around the world. I did all of these things for her. I plucked her out of the gutter. I fair ladied her. My fair ladied her. And how can she be so ungrateful and treat me like this? And you know what? You don't have to be a narcissist to have those feelings. A lot of guys are like, I gave her everything. I loved her. How could she treat me so horribly? That's normal. And it's normal to have that anger and that resentment. But I'm talking about guys who they're just perseverating on it and can't move past it and are going to get back together just so that they can be the ones who break up with her. That's not healthy either. But in my experience, those are the two other guys who have a tough time letting go of this kind of person.
Yeah, I would bet you could look for a long time for any evidence whatsoever that any kind of attachment to crazy is somehow a healthy act, and you won't find it. There is, I mean, and folks, to me, you if you're going to get to the point where you're going to crazy proof your life, which is what this is all about. It's about, having a boundary around you that has safety and peace inside of it, and not somebody being abusive, not somebody being controlling, not somebody threatening to kill themselves if you want to go have a drink with your buddies, that sort of thing that so many people do live with in relationships. It means that you have to take a stand and decide that's what you're going to demand from your life.
And part of successfully moving through the grief process on your end means coming to term, not just accepting the end of the relationship, okay, and moving on, but accepting that this is an incredibly limited, broken person who's never going to be anything more than that. And it's not your fault, and it's not your responsibility, and it's not your obligation. It's just the way it is. And that is, as I said earlier, I think one of the toughest things to accept when moving away from one of these relationships.
It is very tough to accept, but it is critically important to do so, because there's stuff on the other side of that once you get to where you figure out, hey, you know what? I deserve better than this. This is not the way I want to live. I'm willing to deal with the pain of loss in order to get this crazy person out of my life. Once you get past that and you succeed at it, it opens up doors for you to start understanding what attracted you in the first place. And that is the second step toward several steps of getting to a crazy proof life, is understanding that you didn't meet and attract and bond with somebody that's bona fide crazy by accident. Crazy people play their partners in the beginning. Dr. T talks a lot about love bombing and how, oh, you're the greatest guy I've ever met. Yeah, and like you're 15 minutes into the first date. Oh, you're so this, you're so that. You're wonderful.
I've done anything like this before. Yeah.
Really? And what part of you hears that and refuses to raise a red flag? What part of you hears somebody complimenting you? And I know that when in early part and when there's physical attraction and the hormones are going and the bodily juices are circulating around, it is easy to almost believe anything if it's going to end up with some sort of sexual encounter or some sort of relationship that you want to be in. But not asking yourself, why was I attracted to somebody that set me up on a pedestal to begin with and then has spent every minute of time since then knocking me off of it and being abusive? And those are hard questions to ask yourself in life. They really are. They're difficult. But if you want to crazy proof it, you're going to be asking those questions. And my guess is, my scientific guess, which is not scientific at all, is that 99 times out of 100, you're going to find that you got set up for that in your family of origin. That in some way, that it sets you up to try to play act your own psychodrama as an adult, reenacting what happened in some ways as a child, and trying to get that corrective experience, trying to get the parent that didn't nurture you or didn't love you or the one that mistreated you. And that gets to be some really tough stuff to work on.
It's called repetition compulsion, which is something you can Google and read about. It's one of Freud's concepts that I think he was spot on about. And it's that when you have that kind of early trauma or traumata, what a lot of people will do is recreate that same relationship over and over and over again, hoping to get that emotionally corrective experience, that different outcome. The problem is when you're getting together with people who are just as messed up as the individual or individuals' parents who did the original damage, you're just going to replay that misery instead of gaining mastery over it. So it's fascinating stuff. Something else I wanted to add, but I've lost it now.
Well, good. I'm not the only one that has senior moments. I like that. Or you had a ginger moment.
No.
We certainly can't say that you had a blonde moment.
No.
One of the things that I think also plays into this, Dr. T, unfortunately, is the way that we socialize men in general.
Yep.
I'll preach on this all day. I'll try not to because Dr. T is supposed to talk too. But we teach boys almost nothing. Most people in this culture teach their boys almost nothing of what they actually need to know about relationships. What they get taught is that if you want to attract a nice woman, you've got to have a good job, you've got to have good appearance, you've got to take care of yourself, you have to be brave. You could list out the Boy Scout pledge and say you've got to be all those things. One, that isn't necessarily what attracts women. Two, you're told how to take care of women. But what we do not do is teach our boys how to live without them. We don't intervene in the social message that you're worthless if you don't have a good-looking woman on your arm, which men compete with each other that way. If a guy has a really hot girlfriend, then other men will hold him in higher esteem. That's just a reality of life. But we don't teach our kids that, wait a minute, that's human nature, but it doesn't mean you have to be a slave to it. And we don't teach boys to start looking for things like character. Parents will even reinforce it. And I mean, innocently, this is not meant to be abusive, but you know, I was told as a teenager a couple of times with girls that I dated, oh, both my parents, she's beautiful, and never a question about what she was like as a human being, what her values were. It was just, oh yeah, she's pretty. And that was all that mattered. And if we don't stop teaching boys that nonsense, we're going to continue. You guys will give Dr. T and I work to do for the rest of our lives, and then every generation after us. I really think that's a strong part of this picture, is that we need to teach boys not just, you know, how to treat someone in a relationship. We need to quit teaching them how to treat women and start teaching them how to treat other human beings.
And also that it's okay to look after their own self-interest and their own well-being, and that any woman who requires that they sacrifice their own self-interest and well-being is not a person they should be with.
And they need to be willing to suffer loss and experience pain in order to maintain that boundary of what they'll accept and what they won't accept in their lives. And that's a pretty hard thing to teach, because you remember how strong puppy love is, right? You can be madly in love with somebody at 14 years old, and it is almost approaching a level of psychosis on its own. So it's hard to intervene in that. But I think it would help if we started teaching our boys to expect more for themselves instead of themselves, where it comes.
Well, it would certainly help if we started teaching little boys right along with little girls that domestic violence can happen to men too. And it's not okay for girls or women to hit men, just like it's not okay for boys and men to hit girls and women. But that's not happening yet. I hope that it will soon. But yeah, there's a social engineering problem here too, obviously. We are coming up at the top of the hour.
Wow, did that fly by fast?
No.
Oh my goodness. Okay.
I don't have any final thoughts on today's topic. I don't, if you do, but we do have a couple of announcements. So, any final thoughts?
Well, one, let's just, I just want to recap. What we went over here from chapter 1 is that the fundamental problem when you end up needing a book like Say Goodbye to Crazy is that fundamentally the original problem is actually that you're dealing with somebody that lacks the emotional acumen to grieve. Mm-hmm. And they will not get through the process ever, no matter what you do, because abandonment to them is like death. It's like worse than death, and it makes you the murderer. This is how these people think. And so you're dealing with a grief process. Actually, you're the one dealing with the grief process. The other person is the one doing it dysfunctionally. You've got to remember that you cannot help them with that grief process. Perhaps a therapist, somebody objective can, not you, not you, not you, not you. I'll refrain from saying that again, but I almost wish I had a bullhorn. It's not your job. And once you say goodbye to crazy, you need to start looking at what attracted you in the first place. And that is where some even tougher work comes in. But of course, there are ways through that too. People actually do it. They really do. They get better and they start treating themselves better, and they say, I'll never be in a relationship like that again, and they mean it, and it really does happen. So it's worth doing the work. I think it's some of the best work. I forget what philosopher said it at some point, but the greatest waste in humanity is an unconscious life. To have been born and go through and go to your grave never knowing who you were or why were you here to begin with.
Life is not worth living. Was that Socrates?
I think so. But I won't swear by it, because as soon as I say yes it was, somebody will show up in the comments with a link proving me wrong.
Aristotle, Plato, it was one of the three.
Yeah, it was one of those guys, one of those dudes, one of those misogynists.
One of those dead Greeks.
Yeah, one of those dead Greek misogynists from way back. Okay, we do have announcements. You want to start talking about some of that, Dr. T?
Yes, you asked for it. It's on its way. There will be a paperback version of Say Goodbye to Crazy available, I hope, within the next, whenever the back cover and spine are formatted by the designer and uploaded to create content.
Yes, which means that you will be able to get the print version of Say Goodbye to Crazy at the same spot, the link below, in just a few days at the most. We have nearly everything complete with that. You'll be able to order the print copy from the Amazon page. That is what Create Space does. They prepare books, and they are, I think, Amazon owned, or at least affiliated with Amazon. So it comes up on that page. That is something several people have asked about, and really glad to say that we were able to get that done and make it available to you. Was there any other announcements?
I don't think so. That's the only one I could think of.
Oh,
am I looking at an audiobook format, but that'll probably take about another month.
Yep. We do want to create an audiobook of the book and have that available too. We'd like to get this out there. Oh, I want to say this probably every time. I want to thank everybody who has purchased the book, and all of you giving us such sterling reviews on it. It's really appreciated. It makes writers feel good when people appreciate what they do, and especially to know that people are benefiting from it is very rewarding. And so thank you for your kind words there in the reviews very much.
Thank you especially for taking the time to write a review. I know it can be a chore or a pain, but it really is appreciated. It helps us with sales. It lets other people who have similar problems know that, hey, you read this book, you found it helpful, so plunk down your $9.99. It's worth it. So truly, thank you for taking the time to do that. I know for some of you, I've gotten notes from people saying, well, you know, my actual name is associated with my Amazon account, so if I write a review, because my ex-crazy stalks me, she's going to know I'm reading this book. So I understand why those of you who have your actual name associated with your Amazon account can't do that. And thank you for letting me know about that. But truly, thank you. Thank you for doing that.
Yes, indeed. And that is going to wrap it up for today. I want to remind everybody, if you are or think you might be in an abusive relationship, like with Crazy, you can always go visit Dr. Tara Palmatier at shrinkformen.com. She also provides fee-for-service consulting, coaching online, on Skype, for people experiencing those problems. You can also, if you're more interested in looking at the narrative of your life, self-image issues and things like that, you can come visit me at anearformen.com and schedule services there. With that, I want to say thank you to everybody for joining us today. Hope you enjoyed this discussion. I know I did. And we will see you next time for Chapter 2 and Say Goodbye to Crazy. Bye-bye now.